The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel tell the incredible stories of three major figures in biblical history: Samuel, Saul, and David. These individuals, despite their differing roles and destinies, are central to the shaping of Israel's identity as a nation under God. The stories explore themes such as faithfulness, obedience, pride, repentance, and God's unchanging covenant. Together, Samuel, Saul, and David represent pivotal moments in Israel's transition from a loose confederation of tribes to a unified kingdom. Through their lives, the Bible also reveals deep truths about humanity's relationship with God and His divine plan. Samuel's story begins with his mother, Hannah, a woman of extraordinary faith. Hannah, barren and deeply anguished, prays fervently to God for a son, promising to dedicate him to God's service. Her prayers are answered, and Samuel is born. True to her word, Hannah brings Samuel to the tabernacle, where he grows up under the priest Eli's care. As a young boy, Samuel hears God calling him in the night, a moment that marks the beginning of his prophetic mission. Samuel emerges as the last judge of Israel, bridging the gap between the era of the judges and the establishment of monarchy. His unwavering obedience to God is evident when he anoints Saul as Israel's first king, even though the decision to have a king represents the people's rejection of God as their true leader. Saul's story is a tragic one, marked by promise and eventual failure. He is chosen by God to be king primarily for his impressive stature and physical presence, which appealed to the people's desire for a leader who embodies worldly power. Initially, Saul appears humble and hesitant to take on such a great responsibility. However, as his reign progresses, his character flaws become evident. Saul repeatedly disobeys God's commands, revealing a heart that prioritizes his desires over divine instructions. One of the key moments of his downfall occurs when he fails to completely destroy the Amalekites, as God had instructed. Instead, he spares the king and keeps the best livestock, claiming his intentions were to offer them as sacrifices. This act of disobedience leads Samuel to confront Saul, declaring that obedience is better than sacrifice, and informing him that God has rejected him as king. As Saul spirals further into pride and paranoia, his jealousy towards David becomes a central focus of his story. David, who enters the narrative as a humble shepherd boy, rises to fame after defeating the Philistine giant Goliath. Armed only with a sling and 5 stones, David's victory over Goliath highlights his unshakable faith in God and his courage in the face of insurmountable odds. This triumph earns David the admiration of the people, but also provokes Saul's envy. Saul's growing paranoia leads him to pursue David relentlessly, viewing him as a threat to his throne. Despite Saul's repeated attempts to kill him, David refuses to harm the king, demonstrating his respect for God's anointed leader and his trust in God's timing. David's journey to kingship is fraught with challenges, but his reign marks a golden age for Israel. As king, David unites the tribes of Israel, establishes Jerusalem as the nation's capital, and brings the Ark of the Covenant to the city, solidifying its spiritual significance. One of the most profound moments in David's story is God's covenant with him, which promises that his lineage will endure forever. This covenant ultimately points to Jesus Christ, the Messiah, who is born from David's line and fulfills God's redemptive plan for humanity. David's reign is characterized by military victories, cultural flourishing, and his deep devotion to God. Yet his life is also a reminder of human weakness and the consequences of sin. David's moral failings, particularly his adultery with Bathsheba and the subsequent murder of her husband Uriah, serve as a stark contrast to his earlier righteousness. When confronted by the prophet Nathan, David's response reveals his humility and understanding of God's mercy. His heartfelt repentance is immortalized in Psalm 51, where he pleads for forgiveness in a renewed spirit. This episode demonstrates that even a man after God's own heart is not immune to sin, but can find redemption through genuine repentance. The stories of Samuel, Saul, and David are deeply interconnected, each highlighting different aspects of God's character and his expectations for his people. Samuel exemplifies faithfulness and obedience, serving as a mediator between God and Israel. Saul's rise and fall warn against the dangers of pride, disobedience, and the desire for human approval. David, despite his flaws, reflects the beauty of God's grace and the hope of redemption. Together, their lives illustrate the complexities of leadership, the consequences of choices, and the overarching theme of God's sovereign plan.